A few months ago, I picked up this pair of football boots. They're called the Adler Horensos, and in my full review, I said that I had never seen anything quite like them. But at the same time, I had never tried on a pair of boots from this brand before, so I wasn't exactly sure what the durability or quality control was going to be like. But now that I've got to play in the Horensos for a while, I wanted to give you an update so that you can determine whether or not these boots might be a good option for you. And if you're interested in picking up a pair or exploring some of the other models from Adler, I'll leave links to purchase below as well as my full review. So for those of you that don't know, Adler is going to be a slightly smaller company out of Japan that only really has 4 main models that they sell. And out of those main models, another unique trait to Adler is that most of them are going to be made with kangaroo leather. And that's especially pretty cool because a lot of bigger brands like Nike and Puma are starting to move away from using leather at all in some of their newer models. But this isn't just any other leather football boot. In fact, it's a little bit different to almost any other leather model that I've tried on in the past few years. And the qualities that made it so unique when I first got them out of the box are still present 3 to 4 months after playing with them. And the first feature I really want to highlight is just how thin and soft the upper is on these boots. The upper is literally only about 1 millimeter thin throughout the entire football boot, and it's also so continuous, which is another feature I like. So the same leather that you get throughout the toe box is just stitched seamlessly throughout the side of the midfoot all the way back to the heel. So there's no blend of synthetic that you're going to get in one part of the boot where it transitions to, say, a knit material or just another kind of stretchy elasticated material. It's just straight up leather all the way throughout. It's a really pure way of making a boot. I think some people might look at the design and think it's a little bit too simple because even the logo is really minimalist as well. It's barely printed in a pretty small font just at the side of the boot here. So they're not really going for anything really flashy or anything with a lot of frills. They're just pretty much putting the craftsmanship and material on display. Now, I was a little bit concerned when I first got these out of the box just with how thin the upper was, and I thought that maybe after a few training sessions or some 5-a-side or pickup games that they might get damaged or some of the stitching might come undone. But I'm happy to say, other than a few stains here and there on the upper, all of that stitching is still completely intact throughout all parts of the upper. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to make this video, because sometimes when you take a pair of boots out of the box, or even when you unbox anything, it can feel really premium and high quality to begin with, but after using it for a few months, certain things may break or fall apart that you weren't expecting, but thankfully that wasn't the case with the Adlers. And then moving on to the sole plate, this is another one of my favorite features of these boots, and the main reason that I like the sole plate that's used with the Horensos here, and I believe it's the same sole plate that's used across the Adler line, is that it's really flexible, especially throughout the midfoot here, which is something that you don't see in a lot of football boots. Usually most boots have a little bit of snap towards the toe box, but other than that, the heel and midfoot are extremely rigid. And the main reason they do that is to give you a slight added energy return and responsiveness when you're running or sprinting. So a rigid sole plate can make it a little bit more snappy when you're, say, about to start off on a sprint. But in my opinion, you have a trade-off there that just isn't really worth it, because your foot is supposed to pronate naturally around the midfoot here. So when you start taking off for a sprint or a jog, your toes are going to bend somewhat like in this fashion here. And if a boot is constrained throughout the midfoot where it's too rigid to bend here, that can be fatiguing for your feet over time, and it isn't ultimately the most comfortable experience, at least in my personal opinion. So I actually really like when boots have a little bit of give here in the sole plate, and Adler is one of the few brands that does that. There's a few other boots that have that similar feature, like the Nike Premier 3 and the Copa Goro from Adidas. On top of that, I also got amazing traction throughout this sole plate, despite the fact that the studs don't really look that aggressive. There's just about 4 conical studs in the heel, and then about 8 conical studs towards the forefoot area, but they were more than aggressive enough for use on artificial grass and firm ground. And then another thing that I'm very happy to report is that I see virtually no sole separation whatsoever on the sides of these boots, because usually when it comes to the durability of football boots, the first thing that starts to go wrong is going to be the sole separating from the upper, especially towards the toe box area, and that can usually be the reason why people have to buy a new pair of boots. So I'm really happy to see that this is pretty much completely intact, so the build quality and the construction of these boots definitely seems to be sound. Now, in terms of how I use these boots over the past few months, I'd say I've roughly been playing them around 2 to 3 times a week. So I'd say that's around medium use, so not necessarily every single day for multiple hours. And I've been able to use them in a variety of conditions, mostly both rain as well as dry conditions. In fact, the first day that I wore these, it was pouring rain, and they seem to do pretty well. Since the upper is so thin, I don't think that they suffer from getting too waterlogged compared to some other slightly bulkier, more plush leather football boots that maybe weigh a little bit more. They didn't suffer from that too much. They were really easy to dry out, and so they're definitely going to be reliable in a variety of conditions. Then in terms of comfort, this is another point that I really wanted to talk about, because obviously there's some boots that feel really good when you first try them on, but then after a couple weeks or maybe even a few days, they can get pretty painful towards the heel area, maybe in the ankle area or the toe box. You start to notice some pressure points arise with certain models. So I kept an eye out for that with the Adlers. I was trying to feel around if I noticed anything in the heel, near the ankle area when it came to lockdown, or towards the toe box. And honestly, these boots felt amazing when I first tried them on, and they felt just as good every single time after that. So there was no pain or pressure points that developed anywhere. So the heel, even though it's not extremely cushioned, there's a very light amount of padding towards the back of the heel cup. It was extremely comfortable. There was no irritation or pinching towards the front of the ankle and the toe box. While if you're looking at the sole plate, it doesn't necessarily seem like it's the widest that you can get compared to some other leather models like maybe the 442 from New Balance. There's actually a lot of volume in the toe box here. So if I press down, you can see that the upper goes kind of around the side of the toe box there. And I didn't notice any issues with pressure points around my big toe or pinky toe. There was plenty enough room in the toe box on the Horensos. Now, one caveat I will mention with regards to the fit is that the sizing on these is a little bit odd. They run extremely long compared to some other models from say like Nike or Adidas. So where I'm traditionally about a 10.5 US in most models that you would find online, for the Horensos, upon a lot of other people's recommendations, I went a full size down for these. So I got a 9.5 US, and the fit and length was perfect for that sizing. So I had just about maybe half a centimeter or so of space between the end of my toes and the end of the boot. So I would definitely recommend, if you're looking at picking up either the Adler Horensos or any other pair of Adlers for that matter, I would recommend going a full size down. And I also can't stress enough that these boots really didn't have any break-in time whatsoever, because sometimes with leather boots, when you try them on for the first time, they may be pretty comfortable, but you need to give them a few sessions just for them to really mold to the shape of your feet, which most leather boots will do if you give them enough time. But with the Adlers, very similar to like the Mizuno Morelia 2s that I tried on not long after these just felt so good straight out of the box. And honestly, they feel exactly the same today as they did when I first got them about 4 months ago. Now, while the most important parts of the football boot, including the upper and the sole plate, have amazing durability thus far, I would say the only thing that hasn't held up quite as well as I would have hoped would be the insole here. But even then, that's not really giving the full picture, because if you look at the insole here that I've just removed, it's pretty much just this top layer of foam that is starting to peel off of the insole. But other than that, if you look at the back here, everything is still perfectly intact. So the insole isn't actually worn through. It's still perfectly functional. It's just Adler, for some reason, added this really, really thin layer of foam on top of all of their insoles. And I'm not sure if they did it for comfort or aesthetic reasons, because it doesn't really do anything because it's literally less than a millimeter thin, but it pretty much peels off almost instantly. Now, the good thing about that is that you literally do not notice it whatsoever once you put the boots on, because it's so insignificant. I think that it's just something that they could have left out from a durability perspective. Other than that, everything has worked out pretty much perfectly. Now, in terms of performance, it's not too surprising for me to say that these were absolutely amazing to play in based on how comfortable I thought they were, because usually if you find a pair of boots comfortable on your feet, they're going to be great to play in and you're going to have a lot of fun, assuming they also offer enough traction. And with the Adlers here, after just wearing them for a couple minutes, you're going to completely forget that they're on your feet. And I think it's down to a few specific design choices that I've covered already as to why these feel so comfortable and perform so well on feet. First off, the extremely thin and soft kangaroo leather upper is obviously going to feel amazing on your feet, but it also wraps and hugs your feet very tightly due to this traditional lacing system here that you get running down the midfoot. It's going to be really adjustable, so regardless of the exact shape of your foot, you should be able to get these to wrap really tightly and evenly around. And at the top of that lacing system, the final lace hole is going to be placed perfectly just below your ankle to give you the perfect amount of lockdown and ensure that your heel isn't going to be moving around or causing blisters. And then on top of that, there's going to be, as I mentioned, just enough volume throughout the toe box to allow your toes to spread out and not cause you any blisters. And to wrap things up, they're going to have that great bending feeling that you get throughout the midfoot, so that when your foot's pronating, you're going to feel really free and you're not going to feel like your foot is constrained at all. Then as far as the touch on the ball, the first touch on this honestly feels as close to barefoot as you can get. And I know that word gets thrown around a lot when you're talking about minimalist or thinner football boots, especially speed boots, things like the Nike Vapor 15 or the X Crazy Fast from Adidas. And it's true, those boots are very, very thin. The uppers are pretty much like razor thin. Some of them are translucent. But I think, in my opinion, there's just something a little bit different about the feel that you get with leather. It just feels a little bit more connected with the ball. And speaking of other brands, I wanted to talk briefly about how this boot stacks up against some competitors. Because honestly, I think a few other brands could learn a thing or two by looking at some of these models from Adler. First up, if you're going to charge $150 or more for a pair of boots, which the Adlers do cost about $150, they need to have top-notch materials, great build quality, and feel comfortable on your feet. Because it's way too often that you pay over $100 for a pair of boots, and they just don't really meet those basic criteria. And secondly, I think brands should focus on getting the basic things right first before adding additional frills to their boots. Just as an example, if I look at the Copa Pure 2 from Adidas, a boot that is pretty good but costs about $230, it has a decent fit and the upper is okay, but they've tried to do so much, making a hybrid of both calf leather and synthetic, adding a knit material across the midfoot. When you compare that to other models like the Adlers that are significantly cheaper, the fit isn't quite as good, the materials aren't as high quality, and the construction of the boots isn't quite up to the same level either. So I think these boots prove a great point that most of us already knew all along, and that's that if you nail the basics, all of the extra things just don't matter as much. Now, in terms of value, at the $150 price point, nothing really comes that close to the Adlers. I would say the only thing that could even be in the same conversation would be the Mizuno Morelia 2s here. But honestly, these are actually a takedown version because this is the Mizuno Morelia 2 Elite rather than the Made in Japan version. So you're not even getting a full kangaroo leather upper with this boot. It's going to be predominantly throughout the toe box. So while this is another one of my favorite boots right now, for roughly the same price, the Adlers are still going to be a better deal. If your budget only extends to about $100, the Nike Premier 3 would still be a great option, but other than that, if you can stretch it to $50, these are definitely a pair of boots I would recommend trying out. So that's going to do it for this video. I really just wanted to make this one to follow up on these football boots and give you guys a better insight regarding their durability. Because I know that as a slightly lesser known brand, it might be a question that a lot of you have. So I hope this has been helpful. Feel free to like and subscribe for more football content, and I will see you in the next video.